So far, we have seen how do we measure the spatial scale of the universe, which is simply 1 over a Hubble constant. What about its temporal scale? What's the age of the universe? It turns out that we actually can't measure the age of the universe directly. However, what we can do is measure lower limits to the ages of oldest things we can find. And then presumably the age of the universe is just a little more than that. Several different possibilities exist. The first one is the globular star clusters. These are believed to be formed over a very short time interval in the early universe, and all stars in them have essentially the same age. Understanding the ages of star clusters or stellar populations is the basic fundamental thing in stellar evolution theory. So in principle, we understand how that changes by looking at their color magnitude diagrams. The second kind of thing that we can look at are white dwarfs. Again, these are inert incandescent cores of low-mass stars that are now slowly cooling down. The cooling theory is fairly well understood, and by observing apparent luminosity function of white dwarf stars, we can estimate how old are the oldest ones of them. Another thing we can do is estimate the age of the heavy elements created in stars. Very high mass elements would tend to be radioactively unstable. And if we can find long-lived isotopes of some of those elements and measure the relative abundances, we can estimate the age of those elements, which presumably came from supernova explosions in some of the very first stars. This is very similar to the carbon dating that's often used on planet Earth. That is somewhat model dependent because it depends when the supernovae were exploding, but the upper limit of that would again give the lower limit to the age of the universe. And finally, we could model stellar populations in a similar way that we model star clusters, but that turns out to be much more complicated and it's really not used to constrain the age of the universe. The fundamental measurement here is estimating the ages of globular clusters, which are almost as old as our galaxy itself. This is based on a well-established and well-tested theory of stellar evolution, which predicts so-called isochrones, which is color magnitude diagrams and the paths that main sequence and the giant branch will have at any given time. They look like this. The main sequence turnoff moves to ever lower masses, lower luminosities as time goes on, and then stars ascend the giant branch. So by measuring where the main sequence turnoff is and where the giant branch is, we can fit the models and find out how old the cluster is. Likewise, the difference between the turnoff and the position of the horizontal branch is another age indicator. The isochrones will depend slightly on the chemical composition of stars in the cluster. So there are many uncertainties in those estimates, but the biggest one of them all is the uncertainty in the distance to the globular clusters. Stellar evolution models are pretty good, but in detail, there's still some minor uncertainties that need to be resolved. The exact effects of the different abundances of chemical elements and diffusion from stellar cores in which they're made towards the surface and so on. Those also contribute